It's my pleasure to welcome Catholic priest and theologian James Alison for a conversation about his very unique and very relevant theology. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much indeed, Suzanne. It's a pleasure.
James, you know, I've been reading you for years, and I knew you as Alison, the theologian, before I knew you as James.
Oh.
But one of the things that intrigued me from the first time I picked up one of your books was that you don't begin your theology with God talk right away. You start with this wonderful introduction about who we are as human beings. It's an anthropology, you say. And that captivated me, first because I could understand it. You were talking about human beings, you know, and not God. But I'm wondering if you could talk about why you begin your theology with an anthropology.
Yeah, I guess because we tend to be trapped in certain, I don't know how you say, prejudices concerning what it is to be human. We think, for instance, of humans as essentially rational. We think of our bodies as somehow secondary to who we are. These kind of things, with the result that we're not actually aware how, as humans, we learn, how, as humans, we're affected by what's other than us, what brings us into being, what maintains us in being, what allows us to keep going, which is our enormous dependence on what's other than us. And it's as we relax into those apparently mucky, messy, not exact-seeming things that we start to be able to make sense of theology, because after all, theology is an act of communication from God to us, who are this mucky monkey, not some perfect machine that's able to think in clear and distinct ideas. So yes, I think that it's enormously liberating for us to be let out of some of the traps concerning how we as humans work that are kind of embedded into our pop psychology.
Well, the pop psychology tells us that we are rational beings, that we are these discrete individuals who are in charge of our own lives and, you know, independent, not dependent on others. So,
and yet we also know perfectly well that while we think of that as true about ourselves, we see perfectly well that it's not true about other people.
Well, of course not.
We're the first to pick up when someone appears to be saying immensely rational sounding things, but they're moved by a series of passions that causes them to hold on to this particular thing. We're the first to see, oh yeah, they would think that because of X, Y, and Z. In other words, we understand that what for them passes as a rational position is in fact a product of their pattern of desire. We understand that with relation to other people. Ourselves, no, of course, no, we're immune from all that.
Well, of course.
So I think that it's quite important that we realize quite how like those passionate people that we
are.
We are.
Yeah, and desire is a very key term for you.
It is, which I love.
And it's a key term for your understanding of who we are as human beings and how we operate. Yeah. So can you talk about, because you don't mean sexual desire or that sort of thing.
This is a terminology and a way of thinking that I learned from the French thinker René Girard. And his key insight, as I understand it, is that we desire according to the desire of the other. In other words, rather than desire starting in me as though there was a blob somewhere in here that was myself, from which an arrow called my desire comes out. In fact, we are very, very malleable, very dependent on what's other than us to teach us how to desire. It's much more like, Daddy, Daddy, show me what to want, and then maybe I'll be someone. Or the equivalent of that. So where there's a very, very malleable construct, and we desire according to the desire which we are shown, that is modeled for us by someone else. Objects acquire value according to the model who is pointing to them. Something which advertisers understand extremely well, but which also more or less anybody understands when you see it at work in any childhood or adolescent setup. Again, it's one of those things which is clear to us in everybody else, and very difficult to see in our own cases.
Why is that? That is so true, that we don't like to admit that we're influenced by others.
Yeah.
Is it, you know, you're British, I'm American, the American, you know, cowboy image of being completely my own person sort of colors us and keeps us from admitting that we are influenced.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, just as a cultural observation, it is odd. One of the oddest things which Brits notice when they come to America is how extraordinarily homogeneous you are in dress styles and so on and so
Really?
forth. Yes, compared to many. I mean, if you've hung out in London, London is seriously weird compared to the sheer homogeneity. But it's again, it's one of the interesting things. The more we prize ourselves on individuality, the more the same we are. It's one of the weird things about
it
us.
really is, because to prove we're unique, we adopt the latest fashion.
The latest fashion, yeah.
And so, but what is it? What does that get in the way of? I mean, if we're constantly denying that we are influenced by others, what does that do to us, or keep us from being able to do?
I think that one of the many, many things it enables us to do is actually being able genuinely to like ourselves or anybody else. I know that sounds a bizarre thing to say, but if you're so busy in defensive mode, actually being able to acquire the equality of heart that enables you to see other people weak, fallible, mucked up, and smile at them because not frightened to see yourself in them. I think that's tremendously important, and that's something which we do tend to miss, precisely because we're supposed to, not to admire all those things.
Right.
So not to have what I call this equality of heart, and I think that mercy is equality of heart before anything else. It's how we're able to let go of what we dislike in ourselves only when we let go of it in someone else. Because we typically dislike the people we really dislike the people who are very like ourselves.
Right.
And other people can tell this. We, of course, think of ourselves as completely different from them.
Who we're most influenced by, right.
The same thing as us, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and right. It's perfectly common. Anyone who's been in a school or in any kind of tight community knows this. The people you find most difficult to get on with are not the ones who are really different from you. Mm-hmm. Really different people are actually quite interesting and curious. The people who are really, the ones who really get your craw are the ones who everyone else can see are, oh, well, they're just like each other.
are just like, yeah. It's just making me think of all of the brothers and sort of twinning that happens in biblical stories, that there's so much conflict within families.
Yes, it's similarity rather than difference that leads to rivalry. And I think that's one of Girard's great insights. Yeah. That so much of our explanations of rivalry is based on fake differences, whereas it's similarity that is
right.
What makes us rivals of each other.
Absolutely, that's so interesting when you look at the rivalries. Even if you look at political situations in the Middle East, they're brothers that are fighting.
Brothers, cousins.
Cousins.
And the usual explanations which we get given is to try and talk about how different they all are, multi-secular, ethnic conflicts and things like that. But actually, the people who go there and say, actually, no, these people they're all very much alike, and that's what makes it so difficult.
It's Girard says, the scandal of small differences.
Yeah, right? I think that's Lash. I think Lash's phrase is the narcissism of small differences.
Narcissism of small differences.
Yeah,
yes.
That's
so
right.
we make mountains out of molehills. Yeah. If we could acknowledge what we owe one another, or what we are, how alike we are to one another, and that our desires are influenced by one another, we could bridge the small difference.
Or at least let go of some of the things that really irk us, because often enough they irk us in ourselves.
Yeah, but you know what, James? It feels really good to be ticked off. And we tend to nurse these things and enjoy being insulted or wounded in some way.
Yes, self-righteous indignation
it's a delightful
powerful
thing.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, and any excuse for self-righteous victimry bleating it makes us actually moral. I think that this is the really difficult thing. It may sound odd to hear a theologian saying this, but one of the most difficult things I find in teaching theology is people's addiction to goodness. Theology is principally for people who are not very good. But because, well, that's the whole point of it, it presupposes. This is God talking to people who are inclined to be screw-ups, liars, murderers, thieves, etc., manipulators, and so on and so forth. And yet, just think how much investment in our society and our culture there is in being the good guy. How much talk there is about morality, as though people can, once you get a boundary of yourself as good, this then has real value in any form of public engagement you have. And actually, this is terrible, because it's much more a case of the broken-hearted, people who are able to sit with weakness and flawedness, who are actually able to share without provoking each other. Anyone can provoke people into a state of mutually antagonistic rival goodness.
Yes.
Which leads to nothing at all.
So we're each defending our goodness against your goodness, because for me to be good, then you must not be good.
And
exactly,
vice versa.
Right? And
so
vice versa.
we become complicit. We are each other's necessary enemy.